Okay, so you ready to dive into something kind of heavy?
Lay it on me.
Well, it's a question that I feel like is on everyone's mind these days. Where's the best place to live if, World War III actually happened?
Yeah, it's not exactly a light topic, is it? But I think it's important to be informed about the potential risks we face.
For sure. I mean, it's hard to ignore the headlines, right?
Yeah.
Escalating tensions, the war in Ukraine still going on, and this just general feeling like the world's kind of a tinderbox right now.
Yeah.
So, I guess for this deep dive, we're going to look at what a potential World War III could look like, and then explore those countries that might actually be a bit safer if, God forbid, things really go south.
Okay. Sounds like a plan.
So, maybe we should start with like the things that are actually pushing us closer to, well, to the brink.
hmm
Like, what are those developments that are making things feel so tense right now?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, think about President Trump's reelection and
Yeah.
his America First policies. That's definitely shaken things up globally.
Yeah, it's like everyone's trying to figure out what America's going to do next, and that uncertainty is making a lot of people nervous.
Exactly. And then you have the European Union dealing with its own set of challenges, the migration crisis, the rise of right-wing populism, economic anxieties. It's all putting a lot of strain on the EU.
Yeah, it's like the foundation of the EU is cracking a bit,
Mm,
and that has huge implications for the balance of power, not just in Europe, but globally.
absolutely. And then, well, you can't ignore Asia,
Huh.
arguably the most volatile region right now.
Oh, yeah.
China's getting more and more assertive, especially about Taiwan. And then, North Korea's involvement in the Ukraine conflict. They've actually sent troops to support Russia.
Wait, North Korean troops are fighting in Ukraine? I hadn't heard that.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, and then, of course, we have those conflicts that are already raging, like the war in Ukraine, Israel, Hamas, all these other regional conflicts that are just kind of simmering beneath the surface.
Yeah, it's a lot to keep track of, that's for sure.
Yeah.
All these interconnected conflicts and shifting alliances, I mean, it makes predicting what's going to happen almost impossible.
Yeah, talk about a tangled web.
Yeah.
So I guess one thing's for sure. If a full-blown World War III does erupt, it's going to be unlike any war we've ever seen.
Exactly.
Okay, that's where things start to feel a bit, well, scary,
Yeah.
but also kind of fascinating. So what would a modern-day World War III, like what would that actually look like?
Well, first off, forget about those traditional battle lines. This wouldn't be like, two clear sides fighting each other. We're talking massive power blocks, the US, China, Russia, NATO, all vying for dominance.
Okay, so it's more like a free-for-all than a clear-cut two-sided conflict.
Right. And the alliances are fluid, they're shifting constantly, so you never really know who's going to side with whom.
Wow, it's like a high-stakes game of chess. But the players keep changing sides mid-game. How do you even keep track of that?
It's incredibly complex and dangerous because of that complexity.
Right, right.
And another thing that's different is this wouldn't be just one single, localized conflict. It would be simultaneous confrontations erupting across multiple theaters, Europe, the Middle East, the Asia Pacific, a truly global conflict at a scale we've never seen.
So basically, the whole world would be a battleground.
Yeah, pretty much.
And then we can't forget about technology, right? This wouldn't be like, World War II with just tanks and trenches.
Oh, absolutely not. Technology would be absolutely central to this kind of conflict. Think about it.
Mhm.
Cyber attacks that could cripple entire countries, shutting down power grids, financial systems, communication networks, you name it.
Okay, yeah.
And then you've got AI-powered weapons making decisions without any human intervention, potentially escalating things beyond anyone's control.
That's some pretty scary stuff, to be honest.
Yeah. And then, of course, there's the looming threat of nuclear weapons. That's a nightmare scenario that we can't just ignore, right?
Okay, yeah, that's definitely the ultimate nightmare.
Yeah.
But let's not spiral into despair just yet. So for the sake of this deep dive, let's assume that, despite all of this, some countries might actually fare better than others. So let's shift gears and talk about, like, what would actually make a country resilient, a potential safe haven in a World War III scenario?
Okay, yeah, that's a good approach. So I think there are several key criteria to consider when we're assessing potential safe havens.
All right, and listening.
First and foremost, geopolitical neutrality.
So like Switzerland, right? The classic example.
Exactly. Switzerland's a great example, but it's not the only one. We're talking about countries that have a long history of staying out of global conflicts. They don't pick sides. They generally avoid getting entangled in these international power struggles.
Makes sense. Stay under the radar, don't become a target.
Right.
What else are we looking for?
Well, geographic isolation is another crucial factor. Think about remote islands, countries tucked away behind mountain ranges, places that are just difficult to reach. The farther away from major conflict zones, the better.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, pretty much. But it's not just about hiding, right?
Right.
A country also needs to be inherently stable to withstand the pressures of a global crisis. Strong governments, low levels of corruption, well-functioning institutions, a society that can kind of pull together when times get tough.
Right. So basically a solid foundation is essential. What about self-sufficiency? Like, could a country actually survive on its own if global trade and supply chains collapsed?
Yeah, that's critical. Being able to produce your own food, water, energy, that's absolutely crucial in a crisis situation. Reliance on imports becomes a huge liability when the world's at war.
Right. So independence is key. But even in a crisis, people still want to live a decent life, so quality of life has to matter too, right?
Oh, for sure. Access to healthcare, education, just a general sense of well-being, all of that's still important. You don't just want to survive, you want to be able to thrive, even in challenging circumstances.
So it's kind of a balance, safety, stability, and being able to maintain a certain standard of living,
Yeah.
even with all the turmoil.
Exactly. And one last thing to consider is whether a country has a low military profile. Countries that don't have big armies or tons of valuable resources are less likely to be seen as targets. They kind of fly under the radar.
So basically, don't be a tempting target. Don't be the country with the biggest army or the most oil or whatever everyone's fighting over.
Precisely.
Okay, so based on all of that, you've identified 5 countries that stand out as potential safe havens in this, World War III scenario.
That's right.
Okay, lay it on me. What are the top contenders?
So our top pick is New Zealand.
New Zealand, huh? Lands of stunning landscapes, friendly people, and surprisingly resilient in the face of global catastrophe.
You got it. New Zealand really checks a lot of boxes when it comes to safety and stability. First of all, it's geographically isolated, way down in the South Pacific, far from, well, just about everything.
Yeah.
And they have a fiercely independent foreign policy. They're not a member of any major military alliance. And they've got a long history of advocating for nuclear disarmament. So that makes them a less likely target for aggression.
So geographically isolated, politically neutral,
Yeah.
and they're not exactly waving a big flag that says, come invade us. That's a pretty good start.
Right. And on top of that, they have a strong agricultural sector. They're a major exporter of food, so they could likely feed their population even if, global trade collapsed. Plus, they're investing heavily in renewable energy, so less reliant on external energy sources if things get rough.
So they've got food security and energy independence. Those are huge pluses in a crisis. What about quality of life?
Well, New Zealand consistently ranks highly in those global indices for healthcare, education, and overall well-being. Stable political environment, strong social safety net, and a culture that really values community and sustainability.
So basically, if you're looking for a place to ride out a global storm in relative comfort and security, New Zealand might just be your best bet.
It's definitely a strong contender. Now, for our second safe haven, we're heading to a country that's pretty much synonymous with neutrality, Switzerland.
Switzerland, land of chocolate, mountains, and those famously secure bank accounts. But tell me more about, why Switzerland makes the list in this World War III context.
Well, as you mentioned, Switzerland has a long-standing policy of neutrality. They're not a member of NATO, and they've skillfully navigated global conflicts for, well, centuries by staying out of the fray.
They're like the Switzerland of, well, Switzerland.
Exactly. But it's not just about their political stance. Their geography also plays a big role. They're landlocked, surrounded by mountains, which provides natural defenses and makes them difficult to invade. And then they have this incredibly well-prepared civil defense infrastructure, extensive bunkers, stockpiles of essential supplies, and a population that's trained to respond to emergencies.
Wow, so they're not just neutral, they're ready for anything. It's like they've been planning for this for centuries.
In a way, yeah, they take preparedness very seriously. And in addition to that, they have a very stable political system, a strong economy, and incredibly high standards of living. So even in a crisis, life in Switzerland would likely remain relatively orderly and comfortable.
Switzerland is a solid choice, for sure. Okay, I'm curious about number 3 on our list. Who's next?
This one might surprise you. It's Iceland.
Iceland. Land of glaciers, volcanoes, and surprisingly resilient in the face of global apocalypse. I never would have guessed.
It might seem unexpected, But Iceland has a lot going for it in this scenario. First off, it's geographically isolated, sitting on a remote island in the North Atlantic. Not exactly an easy target to reach or invade.
Yeah, pretty hard to conquer an island in the middle of the ocean.
Exactly. And Iceland is also remarkably self-sufficient when it comes to energy. They're powered almost entirely by geothermal and hydroelectric sources, thanks to all those volcanoes and glaciers. So they're not reliant on external energy supplies, which is a huge advantage.
That's pretty impressive. I knew they had volcanoes and glaciers, but I didn't realize they were so energy independent. What about food?
They have a strong fishing industry, which provides a reliable source of protein. And while they do import some food, they also have a growing agricultural sector that focuses on sustainable practices.
So they're not entirely self-sufficient when it comes to food, but they're working on it.
Yeah.
And I imagine the quality of life in Iceland is pretty high.
You're right. They consistently rank high in those global indices for education, healthcare, and happiness. Strong social safety net, low crime rates, and a culture that values community and environmental sustainability.
Okay, so Iceland. Come for the stunning scenery. Stay for the apocalypse-proof lifestyle.
I like that. Now, for our fourth kick, we're heading to South America, to Chile.
Chile, known for its dramatic landscapes, from the towering Andes Mountains to the vast Atacama Desert, and apparently for being a pretty good place to ride out a global crisis. Tell me more.
Chile benefits from a similar combination of factors as our other top contenders: geographic isolation and a stable political environment. It's situated on this long, narrow strip of land on the southwestern coast of South America, separated from potential conflict zones by vast oceans and those formidable Andes Mountains.
So basically, if you want to invade Chile, you've got a lot of mountains and ocean to cross first. Not an easy feat.
Right. And Chile has a stable democracy with a long history of peaceful transitions of power. They've made significant strides in addressing social inequalities, and they have a strong economy that's well diversified, with a focus on mining, agriculture, and tourism.
So they've got the resources to be self-sufficient and the political stability to weather a storm. What about their position in the global arena? Are they likely to get dragged into a conflict?
Chile has traditionally maintained a relatively neutral stance in international affairs. They focus more on regional cooperation and economic development, so they're not a major player in those global power struggles, which could really work in their favor in this kind of scenario.
So they're flying under the radar, but in a good way. Stable, resourceful, and not attracting unnecessary attention. Makes sense.
Exactly. And they also have relatively high standards of healthcare and education, at least compared to their neighbors.
Okay, so Chile. Beautiful, resilient, and resourceful. Not a bad place to be if the world goes sideways. All right, let's hear about our final top pick.
Our fifth and final pick for a potential safe haven is Fiji.
Fiji. Okay, now we're talking. Crystal clear waters, pristine beaches, and safe from World War III. This is starting to sound too good to be true.
It might sound like paradise, but Fiji actually ticks a lot of the boxes for a safe haven in a global conflict. It's geographically isolated, located in the heart of the South Pacific, far from any major geopolitical hotspots. And they tend to maintain a low profile in international conflicts, so they're unlikely to be dragged into a fight that doesn't directly concern them.
So they're kind of like the Switzerland of the South Pacific.
Right.
Peaceful, beautiful, and staying out of everyone else's business.
In a way, yeah. They've also made a conscious effort to cultivate a peaceful and inclusive society, with a strong emphasis on community and environmental sustainability. And while their economy is largely reliant on tourism, they're making efforts to diversify and build a more self-sufficient economy based on fishing, agriculture, and renewable energy.
So they're not just a pretty face. They're working on becoming more resilient and self-reliant. And I imagine the quality of life in Fiji is, well, pretty fantastic.
It's definitely a place where you could live a relatively peaceful and enjoyable life, even in the midst of global turmoil. Their strong community ties, their focus on sustainability, and the stunning natural beauty all make it a very attractive option.
Okay, so there you have it. Our top 5 picks for potential safe havens if World War III were to erupt. New Zealand, Switzerland, Iceland, Chile, and Fiji. Quite a diverse group. But before we get too carried away with packing our bags, I think it's important to acknowledge that not everyone can just pick up and move to a new country on a whim.
Yeah.
So you've also identified 3 bonus picks that might be worth considering, especially for folks who, for whatever reason, might need to stay closer to home.
Yes, and these bonus picks offer some unique advantages as well. Our first bonus pick is Bhutan, a tiny nation nestled high in the Himalayas, known for their unique approach to measuring national well-being, gross national happiness.
Bhutan. The land of gross national happiness I've always wanted to visit. But tell me, how would they fare in a global conflict? They're a small country sandwiched between two giants, China and India.
That's a good point. But Bhutan has a long history of non-alignment in international affairs. They've managed to maintain good relations with both China and India, which could act as a buffer in a conflict. And their remote location high in the mountains makes them difficult to access and less strategically valuable.
Plus, they have a really strong cultural identity and this deep-rooted sense of peacefulness. So, Bhutan, peaceful, isolated, and maybe even a little bit magical.
Our second bonus pick is Uruguay, a often overlooked gem in South America.
Uruguay. I'll admit, I don't know much about them. Fill me in.
Uruguay is a small but mighty country with a lot to offer in terms of stability and quality of life. They have a long democratic tradition, low corruption, a robust agricultural sector, and a culture that values peace and tranquility. They consistently rank highly in Latin America for human development, social progress, and press freedom.
So they're stable, self-sufficient, and off the beaten path. Sounds promising.
They are, and their culture is very much focused on peace and tranquility, which would be a welcome respite in a chaotic world.
Okay, I'm adding Uruguay to my list of places to visit. What's our final bonus pick?
Our final bonus pick might surprise you. It's Canada.
Canada. Wait a minute. Isn't Canada a member of NATO and closely allied with the U.S.? Wouldn't that make them a target in a World War III scenario?
That's true, Canada is a NATO member. But remember, we're talking about a global conflict on a scale never seen before. In that scenario, even powerful countries like Canada might struggle to defend their entire territory.
And Canada's huge, right?
Yeah.
Second largest country in the world, huge.
Exactly. And much of it is sparsely populated. So while major cities and military installations might be targets, there are vast regions, particularly in the northern territories, that could offer a degree of isolation and safety. Think remote communities, vast wilderness areas, places that are just off the beaten path.
So basically, if you're looking for a safe haven in Canada, head north, far north.
That's the general idea. Of course, it's important to remember that these are just potential safe havens based on our current understanding of the geopolitical landscape. The reality is that no one can predict exactly how a World War III would play out, and there are always risks and uncertainties to consider.
You're absolutely right. This is all hypothetical, and hopefully it will always remain that way. But it's never a bad idea to be prepared, right? And even if World War III never happens, I think just thinking about these potential scenarios can help us understand the world a little better and maybe make more informed choices in our own lives. Now, we've explored these potential safe havens, but relocating to a new country, even under normal circumstances, is a huge decision with a lot of potential challenges.
Yeah, definitely.
So we need to talk about those challenges before we wrap up. Like, what are some of the hurdles people might face, and how can they overcome them?
Absolutely. There are a lot of factors to consider, from immigration policies and economic realities to cultural differences and potential natural disasters.
Yeah, that's a lot to unpack. All right, so let's dive into the nitty-gritty of relocation and talk about the potential hurdles and how to overcome them. So let's talk about those challenges, the hurdles that people might face if they're actually thinking about relocating and how to overcome those hurdles.
Yeah, for sure. I think immigration is often the first and biggest obstacle people encounter. Every country has its own set of immigration laws, and those laws can be pretty complex, pretty stringent,
Yeah.
and they can change, especially during a global crisis.
So no last-minute visa runs if things start heating up.
Not likely. I mean, take New Zealand and Iceland, for example. They're attractive as potential safe havens, but they also have really strict immigration policies.
Oh,
They
yeah.
prioritize skilled workers, family reunification, and folks with a lot of financial resources.
So you'd need to be planning well in advance if you were thinking about those countries.
Absolutely.
No spontaneous escapes to Middle Earth then. What about Switzerland? Famous for its neutrality, but also for being, well, exclusive.
Yeah, Switzerland is tough, especially for people who aren't citizens of EU countries.
Right.
They have very high requirements for residency permits, and the cost of living is, well, it's incredibly high. So unless you have some highly specialized skills, a job offer from a Swiss company, or a substantial amount of wealth, it's going to be really difficult to get in.
Switzerland. Beautiful, neutral, and expensive. Got it. What about Chile and Fiji? Any easier to get into?
Chile is probably the most accessible of the bunch. They have a variety of visa options for investors, retirees, skilled workers, so it's a bit easier to find a pathway to residency there. Fiji also has some residency options, but they typically require significant investment or business interests.
Okay, so it sounds like immigration is going to be a major hurdle for anyone considering relocation, especially in a crisis situation where, borders could be closing left and right. But
Exactly.
even if you manage to get into one of these safe havens, there are other practical things to consider, like how are you going to pay for it all?
Yeah, economic realities are crucial. The cost of living varies wildly across these countries, and you need to be really realistic about your financial situation. Switzerland and Iceland, as we mentioned, are notoriously expensive. You'd need a hefty financial cushion to make it work there.
Yeah, escaping World War III to Switzerland is going to cost you. What about job opportunities? I imagine finding work in a new country, especially during a global crisis, would be pretty challenging.
Absolutely. Job markets are unpredictable even in the best of times. In a global crisis, they'd likely be extremely volatile. Existing industries could collapse, unemployment could skyrocket, competition for limited resources would be fierce.
So having some savings, a portable skill set, or a way to generate income remotely would be pretty essential, I imagine.
Absolutely.
So prepare for the worst, hope for the best, solid advice. But even if you've got your finances in order and you manage to navigate the immigration system, there's one more wild card we need to consider. Mother Nature.
That's right. Even paradise has its risks. We can't forget about natural hazards. Iceland and New Zealand, for example, are both located in volcanically active regions. They're prone to earthquakes.
So you might escape the bombs, but end up dodging lava flows or scrambling for higher ground during an earthquake. Not exactly a relaxing vacation.
Yeah, not quite. And Chile is also located in an earthquake-prone region, and its long coastline makes it vulnerable to tsunamis as well.
Right, so even the most stable governments can't control the forces of nature. What about Fiji? Any natural hazards there we should be aware of?
Well, Fiji's in the cyclone belt, so they're at risk of powerful storms, flooding, and coastal erosion. And like many island nations, they're facing that long-term threat of rising sea levels due to climate change.
So basically, no place is perfect, right? There are always risks to consider no matter where you go. It's all about weighing the potential benefits against those risks and making informed decisions based on your own individual circumstances and priorities.
Exactly. And even with all of these challenges, there are things you can do to prepare to increase your chances of a successful relocation. Knowledge and preparation are key.
Okay, so let's get practical. What advice would you give to someone who is seriously considering relocating to one of these safe havens? Where do they even start?
Well, first and foremost, do your homework.
Okay.
Thoroughly research visa requirements,
Yeah.
cost of living, job markets, healthcare systems, cultural norms. Don't just rely on those idyllic travel brochures or online forums. Dig deep, consult with experts, talk to people who've actually lived in these countries. The more you know, the better paired you'll be.
Right. Knowledge is power.
Hmm.
Don't just wing it. Be informed. What else?
Be prepared, both mentally and financially. Relocating is a major life change, even under normal circumstances. But in a crisis situation, it's going to be even more stressful, more uncertain, potentially traumatic. Having a financial cushion, a portable skill set, and a strong support system will be crucial. And be honest with yourself about your adaptability, your resilience. Can you handle learning a new language, adapting to a new culture, potentially starting your life over from scratch?
So don't just pack your bags and jump on a plane. Plan carefully, think it through, be realistic about the challenges.
Right. And it's crucial to stay informed about global events. Don't bury your head in the sand. Monitor changes in immigration policies, travel advisories, just the overall geopolitical climate. Be prepared to adapt your plans as needed.
So stay flexible, stay informed, stay connected to those reliable sources of information.
Exactly.
What about having a backup plan?
Oh, that's absolutely essential. Even the best laid plans can go awry, especially in a crisis situation. What if you can't get into your chosen safe haven? What if the situation in your home country deteriorates faster than you expected? Having a plan B could be a lifesaver.
So what would a solid plan B look like in this scenario?
Well, it would involve having access to your essential documents, passports, visas, birth certificates, medical records, anything you might need for identification or travel. It would also involve having some emergency funds readily available, whether it's cash, gold, a cryptocurrency that can be accessed easily across borders. And it's always wise to have a communication plan with family and friends in case you need to get in touch quickly, coordinate a plan.
So if things really hit the fan, you've got a go bag ready, your essential documents are in order, you've got some emergency funds stashed away, and a way to connect with your loved ones. Solid advice.
And remember, even the best prepared plans can kind of unravel in the face of unpredictable events. So flexibility, adaptability, those are key. Be willing to adjust your plans, embrace new opportunities, stay resourceful in the face of challenges.
So stay flexible, stay informed, stay hopeful. Good advice for life in general, really.
Absolutely. And remember, knowledge and preparation can empower us to make informed choices, even when we're faced with uncertainty and fear.
Well said. This has been a fascinating, albeit a bit unnerving deep dive into a topic that, well, we all hope will always remain hypothetical. But even if World War III never happens, I think we've all learned some valuable lessons about global dynamics, risk assessment, and the importance of being prepared for the unexpected.
I agree, and I think it's important to remember that even in the darkest of times, there's always hope. Humanity has faced incredible challenges throughout history, and we've always found a way to persevere.
That's a great point. We're a resilient species. We have this amazing capacity for innovation and cooperation. So let's focus on building a more peaceful and sustainable future while also being prepared for whatever challenges might come our way. But before we get too philosophical, let's bring it back to our main topic. What are your personal priorities in a crisis situation? What factors would weigh most heavily in your decision-making if you were faced with the prospect of relocating during a global conflict?
Yeah, it's a question worth pondering for sure. Is it proximity to loved ones, access to healthcare, cultural compatibility, or maybe it's something else entirely? Your priorities might be different from mine, and that's okay. There's no right or wrong answer here. It's about understanding your own values and what matters most to you in a crisis.
It's about figuring out what truly matters most to you so you can make choices that align with your values, with your priorities.
Exactly. And once you've identified those priorities, that's when you can start to apply what we've talked about today. Research those safe haven countries more thoroughly, look into their immigration policies, factor in cost of living, weigh the potential risks and rewards.
Knowledge is power, especially in a situation like this. And being informed, being prepared, having a plan can make all the difference, even if the worst case scenario never actually happens.
It's like that old saying, hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. And even beyond this specific topic of World War III, I think this exercise has broader implications for how we approach risk and resilience in our lives in general.
Absolutely. We live in an increasingly uncertain world. Being able to assess risks, adapt to changing circumstances, make informed decisions, that's crucial, no matter what challenges we face.
And I think it's a testament to the human spirit that even when we're faced with these daunting scenarios like a potential World War III, we still seek out hope, knowledge, a path forward.
It's a good reminder that even in the darkest of times, we have the capacity for resilience, innovation, and compassion. And those qualities will be essential no matter what the future holds.
So to all our listeners out there, stay curious, stay informed, and don't be afraid to have these tough conversations.
And maybe, just maybe, keep that passport handy just in case. Until next time, stay safe, keep exploring.